Inside this thing called the globe of death, riders cannot simply slow down when something goes wrong. They have to keep moving because the same speed that makes the stunt possible is also what keeps the motorcycle pressed against the cage. On August 29, 2023, during a live stunt show at Happy Valley in Wujinshan Forest Park, Shaanxi, China, two riders entered the globe to perform a high-risk routine. One rider circled horizontally while the other moved along a different path, creating near crossings that depended on perfect timing. At full speed, both riders were relying on momentum to stay attached to the inside of the metal sphere. Then one rider lost control. As the motorcycle broke its line, the rider dropped toward the bottom of the globe. In a stunt like this, that fall happens fast, because once speed is lost, gravity takes over. The rider hit the base of the cage, and the motorcycle came down with him. But the crash was only the beginning. The impact caused the bike to ignite. Flames spread across the bottom of the globe, while the fallen rider was still on the ground nearby. At the same time, the second rider was still circling above him, unable to simply stop without risking another crash. The same cage that made the stunt possible now trapped both men inside with the fire. Staff rushed toward the globe and began spraying extinguishers through the bars, trying to control the flames from outside, while spectators shouted and pulled back from the performance area. Eventually, the fire was put out, and the fallen rider was removed and taken for medical treatment. Reports said he suffered injuries to his arm and leg. The show was stopped immediately after the accident, and the footage remains terrifying because it shows the hidden danger of a stunt like this. Once something goes wrong inside the globe, there is almost no easy way to stop. But if you found this accident disturbing already, prepare yourself for what you're about to see next. On Turkey's Got Talent, a performer named Harun from the acrobatics group Mersin Extreme prepared to attempt a high-speed rollerblade jump off a ramp on live television. There was no helmet, no visible protective gear, and no real margin for error. Just the stage, the ramp, and the hope that he would land cleanly. But the result was disastrous. Harun launched from the ramp and missed the landing mat, hitting the stage hard on his back and neck. Within seconds, his body stiffened in an awkward position, and the atmosphere in the room changed completely. What made the moment even more disturbing was the delay in response. The judges sat frozen, the audience watched in silence, and the medical team was not even the first to reach him. Instead, his teammates, backstage staff, and other competitors rushed in before proper help arrived. Eventually, a neck brace was placed on him, confirming that everyone understood how serious the fall could have been. And through all of it, the cameras kept rolling, even as he was placed on a stretcher and carried toward an ambulance. Luckily, Harun did not suffer serious long-term injuries, but the footage still raises a difficult question. Why was a stunt like that allowed on live television without basic protective equipment in the first place? Now this next one raises a different and even more disturbing question. Why was the stunt allowed at all? On January 11, 2015, Tran Tan Phat stood on the Vietnam's Got Talent semi-final stage with 5 covered cups in front of him. 4 were filled with water. 1 contained diluted sulfuric acid. The act was presented like a deadly guessing game. Drink from 4 cups and avoid the one that could seriously burn him from the inside. Before the stunt began, Phat proved the acid was real. Then that same liquid was hidden among the other cups, and the judges shuffled them while he looked away. The show warned viewers not to try it at home, but the irony was hard to ignore. Millions of people were still watching it as entertainment. The first glass was safe, but then came the mistake.
Glass 1!
Phat had accidentally tasted sulfuric acid, and almost immediately, it was clear something was wrong. The chemical began burning his lips and mouth, but instead of the performance stopping right away, the audience applauded, not fully realizing how serious the moment had become. Whether it was shock, embarrassment, or the pressure of live television, Phat continued the act, drinking from the remaining glasses, even as the acid visibly affected him. By the time it was over, he could barely speak. He later admitted that in that moment, one of his biggest fears was not only what the acid had done to him, but whether the accident would end his career. He was rushed to the hospital with first-degree burns and reportedly needed around 10 days to recover. What was supposed to be a shocking magic trick had turned into a reminder of how quickly a live stunt can cross the line from entertainment into real danger. At least it was a dangerous act performed on purpose. This next tragedy, on the other hand, happened during a moment that was supposed to be completely safe. The show had already ended, and the audience was still seated as performers gathered for a final group photo. It should have been the safest moment of the entire event. The routines were finished, the judging was over, and everyone was simply standing together on stage. But within seconds, that final moment turned into a tragedy. The incident happened during a children's dance audition at the Jinshuixian Theater in Fujian Province, China. More than 100 people had gathered on stage, many of them standing over a central mechanical lift platform built into the floor. These systems are designed to raise and lower parts of the stage during performances, but they depend on proper structure, maintenance, and strict load limits. When too much weight is concentrated in one section, the pressure goes straight into the mechanism below. As the group settled into position, the platform suddenly gave way. The center of the stage collapsed, and dozens of people fell into the machinery pit beneath the floor. Those standing directly over the platform dropped into a confined space filled with broken flooring, metal equipment, and debris. Because the group was tightly packed together, several people fell on top of each other, making rescue even more difficult. From the audience, it looked as if part of the stage had simply disappeared. Emergency crews arrived and began pulling people from the collapsed section, moving carefully because of the risk of further injury inside the pit. In the end, a 13-year-old girl was killed, and 14 others were injured.
由昆明雀神文化传播公司主办的一场儿童活动的海选现场，舞台中央的升降小舞台发生了坍塌，事故造成了1人遇难，14人受伤。那么伤者分别在福建漳州和厦门等地的医院接受了治疗，没有生命危险。
Authorities later revealed the theater had been built without proper approval and had not passed required safety inspections. Several people connected to the venue and event were detained. What makes the footage so heartbreaking is that this was not a dangerous stunt or an extreme performance. It was supposed to be a final photo. And because corners were cut somewhere behind the scenes, a stage meant to hold young performers became the thing that failed beneath them. That was already shocking, but what you're about to see next is even worse, because this time, the danger wasn't caused by a mistake from someone else. He chose to do it himself. Spencer Horseman was nearly 2 minutes underwater, weighed down by chains and locks, when his fingers started to fail him. The 29-year-old escape artist had already removed multiple restraints, but one lock still stood between him and air. This act was a modern version of Houdini's water torture cell, a stunt designed to make the audience feel every second of panic without fully understanding the danger inside the tank.
Going in. Start counting. Start counting. Oh yeah.
Around him were 25 feet of chain, multiple steel padlocks, Smith & Wesson handcuffs, and ankle shackles. Once he was inside, a reinforced lid was lowered and locked above him. The average person can only hold their breath for about 30 to 60 seconds. Spencer had to stay underwater for several minutes while picking locks under pressure. It was suffocation packaged as entertainment, and everyone watching knew the entire act depended on timing, control, and his body not giving out before the final lock opened. But this wasn't the first time Spencer had pushed this stunt too far. Just months earlier, during a rehearsal, he had blacked out underwater with locks still remaining, forcing his crew to pull him out unconscious. Even before that, on America's Got Talent, he had barely escaped a similar water stunt in time.
Oh my goodness! Mr. Horseman has done it!
He doesn't look good.
Wow!
So when he climbed back into the tank for a live performance, the question hanging over the room was obvious. Would he make it out this time? At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. The restraints came loose one by one, and Spencer kept working, already holding his breath longer than most people ever could. But then the water became dangerously hot because of faulty equipment, reaching around 105 degrees. His fingers became numb, his body started weakening, and the final lock became harder to control. By the time the crew pulled him from the tank, he was disoriented, shaking, and barely conscious. He was strapped to a stretcher and taken to the hospital, where doctors later said he had suffered brain damage from the ordeal.
So everybody wants to know how you're feeling right now. What's going on?
Mainly tired, worn out, haven't eaten, thirsty. But doctors told me I need to be here, keep on evaluation, since I did black out.
It was the second time in just a few months that Spencer had nearly drowned performing the same kind of stunt. And while his skill was undeniable, the footage leaves behind one uncomfortable thought. Sometimes being almost good enough is still not enough when your lungs are the timer. Now water was the prison in that stunt. But in this next one, it was dirt, cement, and a coffin that began to collapse. In 1992, escape artist Bill Shirk was buried alive under tons of dirt and wet cement in Indianapolis. The stunt was horrifying on its own, but the timing made it even darker. It happened exactly 2 years after another performer, Joe Burris, died attempting a similar buried-alive escape in Fresno, California. On October 31, 1990, Burris climbed into a plastic coffin, while dirt and wet cement were poured on top. The weight crushed the coffin almost instantly, killing him in front of witnesses and family members.
Despite the efforts of his crew, it was too late. Joe was crushed, and with him died his dream of being the next Houdini. He died there in that coffin of his own making.
Even Houdini had considered buried-alive stunts extremely dangerous, and Shirk knew exactly what had happened to Burris. Still, on October 31, 1992, the 66th anniversary of Houdini's death, he attempted his own version. Police regulation handcuffs were locked around his wrists, 30 pounds of chains were secured to his body, and his plexiglass coffin was lowered 6 feet underground. Then came the dirt, followed by the cement. What made the stunt so unforgiving was the tiny margin for error. Shirk believed the coffin would begin collapsing around 60 seconds after the cement reached ground level, and he planned to escape far faster than that.
Hope I make this. I got a bad feeling about this thing. But who knows, I may go down there and decide to quit here in a few seconds.
But the conditions had changed. Rain had fallen overnight, making the dirt heavier, and the cement mixture contained more rocks than in earlier tests. Suddenly, the calculations he was relying on were no longer reliable. Then, the coffin collapsed.
What's going to happen? It's starting to collapse. I can feel the...
Shirk was buried under tons of weight, unable to hear the crew above him and unable to escape the way he had planned. As the backhoe operator began digging, Shirk managed to create a small air pocket near his face and push one arm upward through the mud. When the crew finally pulled him out, he was covered in dirt, gasping for air, and barely conscious. He had swallowed dirt while trying to breathe.
The problem was I knew I wasn't going to be able to get up through the dirt, let alone the cement, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't succeed in the escape, but I did get away with my life, which I consider lucky.
Bill Shirk survived, but only because the coffin collapsed in a way that accidentally created enough space for him to breathe. It was not a successful escape. It was survival by pure luck. Now, if you think that looked bad, wait until you see the next one. This performance took years to prepare and cost close to $1 million to build, yet it failed before the real jump even began. The stunt was designed around one massive idea: launching a full-sized car across the St. Lawrence River from Canada toward the United States.
Here we are, 4 years later.
Yeah.
The one thing about all of this is that I hope that the seriousness of it all and the end result lets people know that Ken Carter, the Daredevil.
The distance alone made it extraordinary, stretching nearly a mile across open water, far beyond a normal vehicle jump. At the center of the attempt was a rocket-powered Lincoln Continental, reinforced to survive extreme acceleration and fitted with parachutes meant to slow and stabilize it after launch. On paper, the stunt depended on one thing above all else. The car had to reach enough speed and remain stable long enough to clear the water. Stuntman Kenny Powers took the driver's seat, and as the run began, the rockets pushed the car down the launch path with violent force. But almost immediately, the vehicle began shaking under its own power. The vibrations were so extreme that parts of the car started breaking away before it had even left the ground. Then the parachute deployed too early, opening behind the car during the most critical acceleration phase. Instead of helping after the jump, it dragged against the vehicle while it was still trying to build speed. The combined force of vibration, mechanical failure, and sudden drag tore the car apart even further, and instead of clearing the river, the wreckage crashed into the St. Lawrence.
We can't see what's happening. What's happening? Just tell me what's happening. The parachute's open? Will somebody please tell me what's happening? Please, come in.
Kenny Powers was pulled from the remains and taken for medical treatment with serious injuries. What was supposed to be a record-breaking international stunt became infamous for collapsing in front of the crowd before the jump ever truly happened.
They wanted to have somebody else jump. And I said, are you talking about Kenny Powers? I said to him, he's not qualified. He's not qualified to jump. He's a good stuntman, but he's never been over 100 miles an hour, and he's never been in that car at 260 miles an hour.
Most failed jump stunts fail because they do not have enough power. This one became unforgettable because it had too much of it, and the car simply could not survive the force. But what comes next is even harder to watch. At the 2017 Mad Cool Festival in Madrid, aerial performer Pedro Añón Monroy was dancing inside a suspended glass cage around 100 feet above the ground. Pedro was a respected aerial artist known for his precision and attention to safety, but that night, something went catastrophically wrong. His performance was scheduled between the sets of Alt J and Green Day, and the routine required him to transition from one safety line to a longer bungee-style cord mid-performance. It was a move he had done before, but this time the connection failed. When Pedro jumped, the cord did not catch him. He fell from the suspended cage and struck the ground near the main stage. Emergency responders reached him almost immediately, and paramedics spent nearly 30 minutes trying to revive him. But Pedro Añón Monroy was pronounced dead at the scene.
A horrific fall in front of a stunned crowd, an acrobat plunging to his death in the middle of his performance.
At least one of the bands scheduled to perform today backed out after learning of the accident. A special tribute was held in honor of the acrobat who lost his life.
What made the aftermath so disturbing was that the festival continued. Many people in the crowd were not told what had happened, and Green Day took the stage shortly afterward, later saying they had not been informed of Pedro's death before performing. Some security staff reportedly told worried attendees that he was fine, and the truth only spread more widely after the show was over.
Pero lo impactante fue eso, de repente ver cómo cae y no saber si era parte del espectáculo porque ni había colchoneta abajo ni nada.
Organizers later defended the decision by saying that abruptly stopping the festival could have created a dangerous crowd situation.
Muchos coreógrafos en danza contemporánea que hemos trabajado con él, y él ante todo la seguridad y que si nos sintiésemos seguros ante esta nueva situación, pues era algo primordial en su trabajo.
But for many people, that explanation did not erase what had happened. A performer had died in front of thousands, and the event continued around him as if the night could simply move on. And just when you think it can't get more dangerous, it does. Isikair Wubulikasimu was only a short distance from the finish line when his legs began to shake and the wire beneath him started to sway. He had been walking backward for nearly 50 minutes, blindfolded, across a ravine hundreds of feet deep. Isikair was a sixth-generation high-wire performer attempting to cross roughly 700 meters of open air in China's Hunan province with no safety harness and only a long balancing pole to keep him alive.
从小开始练到就是练出来以前就不带保险，以后也不带保险。现在很多那个对方他们要求带保险，就怕危险出事，我们就不喜欢带保险。
The stunt was broadcast on Chinese television as crowds watched from below. For most of the walk, he seemed in control, but high-wire stunts are unforgiving because the danger builds quietly. Heat, Wind, exhaustion, and hunger all become factors. Icykyer later admitted he had not eaten enough before the attempt, and as the crossing dragged on, his body began working against him. Just before the end, with the finish line painfully close, he lost his balance. Icykyer fell from the wire into the ravine below. From the camera's perspective, it looked like a fatal fall, the kind of moment no performer should survive. But somehow, he did. His body crashed through trees and vegetation on the way down, which absorbed enough of the impact to keep him alive. Rescuers later found him with only minor injuries, an outcome that almost doesn't seem possible when you see how far he fell. Even after that terrifying accident, Icykyer continued his career and went on to set multiple Guinness World Records. But this fall remains one of the clearest examples of how even the most experienced performers can be only one lost step away from disaster. And that gets proofed again in this next one. At the Great Moscow State Circus, Kenyan acrobat Karo Christopher Kazungu prepared for the finale of an aerial act. The stunt was known as the drop, and it required him to dive from around 85 feet, nearly 26 meters, and land precisely in the center of a safety net. Kazungu was part of a complex multi-person aerial performance, and the net was supposed to be the one thing separating a spectacular stunt from a catastrophic fall. The circus later said the equipment had been tested, but when Kazungu hit the center of the net, it did not catch him the way it was supposed to. Instead, the net tore open on impact. Kazungu fell straight through and struck the arena floor below. Medics rushed in within seconds, and he was taken to intensive care in critical condition with severe injuries, including a fractured vertebra. The circus director later said the net had passed inspection, and questions were raised about whether the failure was caused by a defect, damage, or something else entirely, but no single clear answer ever fully explained why the safety system failed at the exact moment it mattered most. Kazungu survived and eventually regained mobility after months of rehabilitation, but he never performed again. For a performer who built his life around trust, precision, and timing, one failed net ended everything. But the next performer took the risk even further, as there was no net at all. Colombian acrobat Sixto Chavarro Octavio had spent years mastering extreme high-wire acts, and one of his signature stunts involved riding a handlebarless bicycle across a tightrope. At first, the performance went exactly as planned. He pedaled across the wire roughly 13 feet above the stage, balancing with the kind of control that comes only from years of training. But then he attempted to cross backward. When you reverse across a wire on a handlebarless bicycle, every correction is delayed by a fraction of a second. You cannot react as naturally, and even a tiny loss of balance becomes much harder to recover from. That fraction of a second was enough. With no safety net and no harness beneath him, Sixto lost control and fell headfirst onto the hard floor below. Families who had come to watch a circus performance instead witnessed a possible fatal injury. But what happened immediately after may have made the situation even worse. Staff members lifted his limp body without a stretcher or proper spinal precautions, carrying him away in a way that looked dangerously careless for someone who had just suffered a headfirst fall. In trauma cases like this, improper movement can turn a survivable injury into something far more serious. Sixto was rushed to a hospital but was pronounced dead shortly afterward. To make the tragedy even more painful, his family in Colombia reportedly learned about his death through a nephew connected to the circus.
Tenía experiencia, ya llevaba en Rusia, llevaba como 2 años que estaban allá, que nos ayude la Cancillería para repatriar el cadáver de él, para darle cristiana sepultura, porque la mamá está allá, los hermanos, y pues ellos son de muy bajos recursos.
They could not afford to bring his body home and were left asking for help just to bury him. What began as a circus act ended as a tragedy that exposed not only the danger of the stunt, but also the lack of proper emergency response after the fall. And that takes us from a solo mistake on a wire to two performers colliding mid-air in front of a live audience. Two members of the Salabi performance troupe ran toward the center of the stage before launching into the air at the same time. For a split second, the move looked flawless. Then everything went wrong mid-air. By the final stage of Britain's Got Talent in 2024, every act was trying to deliver its biggest and most dangerous routine. For Salabi, a South Korean taekwondo demonstration team, that meant aerial board-breaking stunts, spinning kicks, and perfectly timed jumps, where even a small mistake could end badly. Near the end of the performance, two members sprinted toward the same target area and leapt into the air together, aiming to strike wooden boards mid-air. But as both performers rose toward the target, one shifted slightly into the other's space. Their bodies collided before the rotation was complete, and one performer lost control of the landing, crashing awkwardly onto the stage before crawling away in pain. The mistake happened so fast that the routine continued almost immediately, but viewers noticed something was wrong. After the performance, the injured member was treated by the show's medical team and taken to hospital. Images later showed his lower leg heavily bandaged and supported in a large brace. The exact injury was not publicly confirmed, but the size of the brace made it clear the impact had been serious. Despite the accident, the broadcast continued, and Salabi ultimately finished in 10th place, an ordinary result for a routine that came dangerously close to ending much worse. But compared to what happens next, that was only a warning. In the opening seconds of Duo Maintenance routine on La France, a un incroyable talent, La Bataille du Jury, one move required Nicolas Bénard to catch his partner, Ludivine Fernand, before she hit the ground. The pair are known for contemporary acrobatics, emotional choreography, and physically demanding partner lifts where trust is everything. In routines like this, one performer often launches blindly into the air, while the other has to be in the exact right position to absorb the landing. During this performance, Ludivine rose into the move while Nicolas stepped underneath her, preparing to catch her weight. But something fell slightly out of sync. Instead of landing cleanly into the position he expected, her weight came down across his neck and upper shoulders. Nicolas collapsed instantly under the impact. A hit to the neck area is always serious because of the risk of cervical spine injury, and for a moment, the entire performance stopped. Medical personnel entered the stage while the audience sat in silence. Nicolas later reported neck pain and temporary numbness, but thankfully, reports confirmed he did not suffer a severe long-term injury. The duo later returned and performed again, eventually winning the show. Still, that opening fall remains one of the most unsettling moments of the season, because it showed how even a routine built on years of trust can fall apart in one mistimed second. That's all for today, folks. If you'd like to see more of this creepy content, click on the video on screen.